Jane es una de mis personas favoritas en todo el planeta, así que por favor, démosle la bienvenida a la doctora Jane Goodall.
Well, thank you, Nicholas, and thank you everybody who's made it possible for me to be here with you today, made it possible for me to be in Mexico. And I find it very significant that on Monday it's the international, maybe it's the Mexico, I'm not sure, but the recognition that Mexico has been one country to stand up to Monsanto and stand up for the native varieties of corn, of maize, that are grown here. Because Monsanto tried very, very hard to bring in their genetically modified maize seeds, which would have utterly destroyed Mexico's bank of heritage seeds. So congratulations to the government of Mexico for standing up against one of the biggest, most powerful countries. So can we give them a hand? So you've heard already that nobody can do anything by themselves. We all need a helping hand as we go through life. And many, many people have supported me. Today it's the staff and volunteers and the board members of the Jane Goodall Institute. There are 26 Jane Goodall Institutes around the world, and we have one mission. Our mission is to make the world a better place for people, for animals, and for the environment. But the one person that I always thank most, because without her, I don't think I'd be standing talking to you today. And that was my amazing mother. So as you've heard from Nicholas, I was born loving animals. I spent as much time as I could watching them. And my mother supported this love from the very earliest age. She tells me that when I was 18 months old, I took a whole lot of earthworms into my bed. Most mothers would be angry. She said to me later, "Jane, you were looking at them so intensely. I think you were wondering, how do they walk without legs?" But instead of making me throw them away, she and I took them back into the garden so that we could live in the earth that was their home. And then when I was 4 years old, and this is the story I love to tell, because it's the making, you see here the making of a little scientist. Just 4 years old, Mom took me for a holiday on a farm in the country, a proper farm where animals were out in the fields and the hens tucked around in the farmyard. And my job was to help collect the hens' eggs. There were about six little hen houses, probably about this high, where they slept at night to keep them safe from foxes. And they also laid their eggs in little nest boxes around the edge. My job, open the lid, if there was an egg, put it in my basket. Apparently, I began asking everybody, but where is the hole on the hen? Where does the egg come out? I couldn't see a hole like that. Nobody answered me. I remember vividly seeing a hen go into one of these hen houses. And I suppose I thought, she's going to lay an egg. I crawled after her. Big mistake. Squawks of fear, she flew out. My little 4-year-old brain must have thought, no hen will lay an egg now here. It's a frightening place. But I'm on the path of discovery for myself. I will find out how a hen lays an egg. And I go into an empty hen house. And apparently I waited there for 4 whole hours. And the family had no idea where I was. And my mother was about to call the police when this excited little girl comes all running up to the house covered in straw. She could so easily have grabbed hold and said, "How dare you go off without telling us? Where have you been?" don't ever do it again, which would have killed all the excitement. Instead, she sat down to listen how a hen lays an egg. And I say that's the making of a little scientist, asking questions, not getting an answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience. It was all that, and a different kind of mother might have killed that early curiosity, and I might not be standing here in front of you today. So, as I say, spent as much time as I could outside, watching the squirrels and the birds and the insects in the garden. There was no television when I was growing up. It had not been invented. And so I learned from nature, and I learned from books. I loved books, and books about animals. So when I was 10 years old, I managed to buy this little book, very cheap edition of Tarzan of the Apes. I didn't know anything about Tarzan and television, but I just read that book from cover to cover and fell passionately in love with Tarzan. And that started my dream. I will go to Africa, I will live with wild animals, and I will write books about them. There was no thought of being a scientist back then. It just wasn't something girls thought about. Anyhow, I was very good at school, but when all my friends left to go to university, we couldn't afford it. It was just after World War II ended. I had to get a job, I needed money. I hadn't forgotten my dream. I went to London, did a secretarial course, boring old shorthand and typing it was back then. And then came the opportunity that I've been waiting for. When I had my dream of going to Africa and living with animals, everybody laughed at me. How will you do that? Africa's far away, you don't have money, and you're just a girl. Dream about something you can achieve. And that was when my mother said, if you really want to do this, you're going to have to work awfully hard, take advantage of every opportunity, and if you don't give up, hopefully find a way. And so when I was working in London, the opportunity came, a letter from a school friend whose parents had bought a farm in Kenya, and she invited me for a holiday. Couldn't save money in London, went home, worked as a waitress in a hotel around the corner. It took about 6 months to save up enough for my fare to Africa. In those days we travelled by boat. There were a few aeroplanes, but they were very, very expensive. So off I went on this amazing voyage, 2 months on the ocean from London. We had to go all the way around the Cape because there was a war between England and Egypt and the Suez Canal was closed. So I had the wonder of seeing the sea get bluer, the air get warmer, the first dolphins jumping around the boat as we went into the warmer waters. And it was just magic. First place I set foot on African soil was Cape Town, right at the southern tip of Africa. And it was so exciting. Africans dressed up in national costume. I didn't realize it was just for tourists. My mother had 2 friends there, and they said, we'll look after Jane and the ship dogs. So for 2 days, they took me around. And at first it was so exciting, the iconic Table Mountain. And then I began to notice on the doors to the hotels and restaurants, there were 2 words in Afrikaans, slegsmans. What do they mean? White people only. It wasn't brought up like that. My grandfather was a congregational minister, and he taught us not to judge people by the colour of their skin or their language, but by who they were as human beings. So I was glad to leave Cape Town, and it was better when I got to Nairobi, because Kenya was just about to become independent of British colonial rule. I stayed with my friend, and then, as you heard, I met Dr. Lewis Leakey. Someone said, Jane, if you're interested in animals, you should meet Lewis Leakey. He took me around the museum. He asked me many questions about the animals there. And because I read every book I could find about Africa and animals, I could answer many of his questions. That boring secretarial course that I did, just before I arrived, Leakey's secretary had suddenly left. He needed a secretary, and there I was. So now I go into a world where there are people who can answer all my questions about the mammals, the birds, the reptiles, the insects, the plants of East Africa. It was a magical experience. At that time, Leakey used to go with his wife and one other young assistant to a place that's now very famous for anybody interested in prehistory, Última Gorge. It's a gorge running through the Serengeti. And he used to go there for 3 months every year, searching for the remains of early humans. Other people said early humans never lived here. He never believed them, and it turned out he was right. That some of the earliest human fossils have been found in the Última Gorge. But when I went, no human fossils have been found, only the remains of prehistoric creatures. And so, some of you may have been in the Serengeti, some of you may go, and it's still a wonderful place. But back then, there were no roads. It was wild. It was untouched. We were just outside living there. And for the 3 months that Leakey, his wife, me, and one other young girl, we saw only 4 human beings, and those were Maasai warriors. The animals were all around. Every evening after the hard day's work digging for fossils, Gillian and I were allowed to walk out just to enjoy being outside. And on this occasion, we were walking along the bottom of Última Gorge. Something made me look round, and there behind us was a young male lion, fully grown, male beginning to grow on his shoulders. And he was standing, looking at us, his tail gently waving. I think he was curious. He'd never seen anything like 2 white young women before. And Gillian wanted to hide in the undergrowth. I said, no, the lion knows where we are. We won't have a clue where the lion is. We must climb up onto the plains, which we did. And it was the right thing to do. It was that evening around the campfire that Leakey asked me if I was prepared to go and study not just any animal, but the one closest to us, the chimpanzee. The first person to go and study wild chimpanzees. How exciting. It took a year to get the money, remember, I hadn't been in college. Leakey chose me because, as he told me later, he wanted someone whose mind wasn't cluttered up with the very reductionist attitude to animals that Western science had at that time. And eventually he found an American philanthropist who said, okay, money for 6 months, we'll see how she does. Second problem, Tanzania back then was the last of the crumbling empire, the last of the crumbling British empire. And the British authorities said, we refuse to take responsibility for this ridiculous idea sending a young girl into the forest. But in the end, he said, all right, but she can't come alone. Who volunteered to come with me? That same amazing mother. People say I was brave to go off into the forest, but she was the brave one, because there she was, left in the tent. We had very little money. We shared an old ex-army tent, not very big, and it didn't have proper so many ground sheet. You tied up flaps around the edge with tape, and that was to let the air in. So in came the air, but also spiders, centipedes, scorpions, even snakes, which I didn't mind at all. There are many baboons in Colombia. The males with their big canine teeth. They're very quick to take advantage of a new food source. And at the beginning, we didn't have the tin trunks that were necessary to protect our small amounts of food. And so the baboons raided the tent, and we had a cook. We were told we had to take a cook. And he very quickly found an extremely alcoholic brew of fermented bananas. So Mum was left with snakes and scorpions and spiders and centipedes and rampaging baboons and a slightly inebriated cook. She was the brave one. And she did something so special for me. For 4 months, remember I had money for 6. 4 of those months, chimps would take one look at me if I got anywhere near them and vanish into the vegetation. And it was a desperate feeling. I couldn't enjoy the beautiful forest because I was so worried I'd be letting Louis leaky down. It was Mum who boosted my morale. She would tell me when I came back, depressed. She said, but Jane, you found that peak, and with your binoculars you see the chimps bending over branches to make sleeping platforms or nests for the night. You are learning about the foods they eat. You are learning about the calls that they make. You are learning how sometimes you see one chimp traveling alone, sometimes it's a mother and the young ones, sometimes 2 mothers with the young ones playing, sometimes a group of males hanging out. We now know chimps are very territorial, and the males patrol the boundaries of their territory. And if they see individuals from a neighboring social group, they will attack and perhaps kill. I didn't know that then. Then sometimes I would see the members of what we now know as a community of about 50. They came together when the new food became ripe. And there was lots of excitement and squabbles and shouting and all the young ones having a great time. So Mum was telling me, you know, Jane, you're learning more than you think. It was really sad. She left just 2 weeks before my breakthrough observation. One chimpanzee lost his spear before the others. Let me get a little bit closer. And on this amazing day, I saw him sitting on a termite mound, and he was breaking off grass stems, scratching open an entrance to the nest, pushing the grass stem down, slowly pulling it out, and picking off the termites with his lips to eat. And I saw him sometimes break off a leafy twig, and to make that into a tool to fish the termites, he had to carefully strip the leaves. David was using and making tools. Today this would not be exciting. Many animals use tools, some make tools. Back then, Western science believed humans and only humans used and made tools. We were described as man the toolmaker. And so it was that brought the National Geographic into the picture. And then we could finance my work once the 6 months grant ran out. And so now I could relax. I knew given time I could get the trust of the communities. And thanks to David, who accepted me so calmly, gradually I got to know the others. His best friend I discovered was the top-ranking male in life. And then there was William, Mr. Wurzel, and Mr. McGregor. I named them all as I got to know them, with their distinct personality. And old Flo, the most sexually attractive female, she was about 50 when I first got to know her, but she still attracted all the males, more than a young female did. And there was passion, and there was Flo's family, Babe and Figure and Fifi, and then little Flint, the first infant whose behaviour could be followed almost daily as he grew older. And so, perhaps the most exciting thing was to find out how like us they are. So, when communication gestures and postures, kissing, embracing, holding hands, reassuring another by gentle patting, begging for food, males competing for dominance, standing upright, facing each other, swaggering, sometimes shaking a fist, lips bunched in a furious scowl, and that should remind you of some male politicians today. I loved watching the relationship between a mother and her growing family, very strong bonds that can last through life. It was a shock to discover, after I'd been with them about 1.5 years, that like us they're capable of brutality and violence and a kind of primitive war, as when the males of one community will systematically attack and kill the members of a neighboring community and take over the territory. But just as they have this dark side, as do we, they also have a loving, compassionate, and truly altruistic side. As when, if an infant loses the mother, if that infant has older brothers and sisters, they will look after the child. But if there's no older brother or sister, an unrelated individual may adopt that child, even a fully adult, unrelated male. So, it's not only that they're genetically so like us, with their DNA and ours differing by only just over 1.5%. And there's similarities in the structure of brain, the immune system, blood, and so on. But so like us in behavior. I get a letter from University. Jane, now I want other scientists to take you seriously. I'm afraid you must get a degree. We don't have time for you to get an undergraduate degree. I found you a place at Cambridge University in England to do a PhD in animal behavior. You can imagine I was nervous. How do you think I felt when some of these erudite professors told me, Jane, you've done everything wrong. You can't talk about chimpanzee personality, mind, and emotion. Those are unique to us. You shouldn't give your subject names. They should have numbers. That's scientific. And you can't have empathy with your subject. A scientist must be objective. Empathy has no place. I knew from the teacher I had as a child that in this respect, these professors were wrong. That teacher that I had, I'm sure some of you have as well, was my dog, Rusty. You can't share your life with any animal and not know we humans are not separate from the rest of the animal kingdom. We are part of it. And we are not the only beings on the planet with personality, mind, and emotion. Any of you young people, if you want to study those attributes, you can. You can study animal intelligence. It's a very hot topic these days. You can study animal emotions. And so, gradually, scientific attitude changed, particularly when the Geographic sent out a filmmaker, photographer, who filmed the behavior I'd been describing and corroborating everything that I'd seen. I got my PhD. I went back to Gandhi. I built up a very small research station. There were students coming out to study chimpanzee feeding behavior and so on. And I could spend hours out in the forest. And not only was I learning more about chimpanzees, but I was also learning about the complex interaction of plant and animal species in the forest ecosystem. Each little species had a role to play in that beautiful tapestry of life. And I couldn't stay there. So why did I leave? I left in 1986 because I learned then at a conference that I helped to put together. And because by then there were 6 other areas where people were studying chimpanzees. And it was forested, but it was a little island of forest. And all around the hills were bad. Forests were gone. And that's when it hit me. These people are cutting down the trees in their struggle to survive. They're living in poverty. They need money from charcoal or timber, or they need to clear more land to grow more food. If we can't help them to find ways of making a living without destroying the environment, we can't save chimpanzees, forests, or anything else. And that's when the Jane Goodall Institute began I believe, the very first true community-led conservation program. We call it Takari. And it wasn't a bunch of arrogant white people going to the 12 poor communities around Gombe National Park. No, it was 7 carefully chosen and local Tanzanians. They didn't even have a PhD, they were no threat. And they went into the villages and asked, what can the Jane Goodall Institute do to make your lives better? And that's where we began. We wanted to grow more food, which meant restoring fertility to overused farmland without chemicals, of course. And they wanted better health and education for their children. And so we worked with the local Tanzanian authorities. We gradually managed to get money to build perhaps a little clinic or to improve a school. And we also provided scholarships as we got the money to give girls a chance of secondary education. Because back then, especially in rural areas, it was very hard for girls to get secondary education. And we provided family planning information, again, delivered by local people. And what I believe was one of the best things, we introduced microfinance based on Muhammad Yunus's Islamic plan, so that a poor person in a village could work out a plan for a small, environmentally sustainable business, like a tree nursery or getting a few chickens so they could sell eggs. And the reason this works so well is because they have to pay back, and over 95% of all the borrowers pay back. And when you pay back, it's yours, you can feel proud. It's very different from a grant that runs out. That's, okay, you do it well, but when you pay back, it's yours, it's your own, you've done it, and then you can go on developing it. So that program is now in 104 villages throughout most of Chimpanzee Tanzania. It's in 6 other countries where JGI studies and tries to conserve chimpanzees. And the great advantage for us is that the people now understand protecting the environment isn't just for wildlife, it's for our own future. They've become our partners in conservation. And we now have a Jane Goodall Institute Conservation Science Program headed by a wonderful scientist, Lillian maybe get him to come and speak one day. He's truly amazing. And he's been able to use some of the modern technology like GIS, GPS, satellite imagery, and so on, to help with studying chimpanzees, but to help the villagers to make land use sustainable plans. So I'm traveling around the world by that time, all over. And even back then, I'm meeting young people who seem to have lost hope. They were angry, or they were depressed, or they were simply apathetic. And I began asking them, why do you feel like this? And they all said more or less the same. Because you're harming our future, and there's nothing we can do about it. You young people here, you know we're harming our future. We've been stealing our future ever since the Industrial Revolution, maybe since the Agricultural Revolution. But is it true there's nothing that you can do about it? Absolutely not, and many of you know that. But back then, it was kind of new thinking. And Roots and Shoots, our youth program, Jane Goodall Institute's youth program, began with 12 high school students from 8 high schools in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, who came to my house, and they were worried about different things. Some of them, why isn't the government doing more about poaching in our national parks? Corruption, of course. Why isn't the government doing anything about illegal dynamite fishing? People were stealing sticks of dynamite from a quarry, and you throw it in the sea, and the fish float up there, and it's exploded. Again, corruption. Why isn't anybody doing more for the children in the streets of no homes? Why are people throwing stones at the stray dogs? There were all kinds of problems they had. And how could they solve them? So I told them to go and get their friends who felt the same. We had a gathering of about 50 young people from these 8 high schools, and Roots and Shoots was born. The main message, which is for all of us today, all around the globe, the main message is every single day that you live on this planet, you make some kind of impact. And you have a choice as to what kind of impact you make. When you buy something, ask questions. How was it made? Did it harm the environment? Was it cruel to animals, like the intensive factory farms where animals are cooped up, similar to a concentration camp? Is it cheap because of unfair wages? Then look for something made more ethically. And it might cost a little bit more. But if it costs more, you'll pay more and waste less. I learned that lesson very early, because when I was growing up, World War II was raging, and everything was rationed in England. And so you valued every bite of food. You didn't throw anything away, you never wasted it. You wore your clothes until they wore out, and you simply had to have new ones. Or, as with my mother, she would buy material and make our clothes. They weren't necessarily very smart, but that didn't matter. So, as I say, everyone can make a difference every day. That's the main motto of Roots and Shoots. And because of learning how everything's interconnected, we decided each group would choose between 3 projects. And it's important here to emphasize these young people were choosing their projects. It wasn't top down. And they would choose one project to help people, one to help other animals, one to help the environment. And that program, which began with 12 high school students, now has members from kindergarten through university, very, very strong in university. Even adults now forming groups, like the staff of a big corporation. And it's in 76 countries around the world. It's growing in Mexico, You'll hear a bit more about that later. And, I'm 91, and I propose to devote much of the rest of my life to growing roots and shoots in as many countries as I can. Because one thing that happens when young people from different countries get together, and we try to bring them usually virtually together, they learn about other cultures, and they begin to understand that much more important than the color of your skin, your language, your culture, is the fact that we're all human beings. We all laugh, we all cry, we can all love. The unfortunate thing about us is that we can all hate. And that's something Roots and Shoots is devoted to trying to change. One of the gatherings we had person to person, there were some young Israelis and young Palestinians, and when they came in, they wouldn't look at each other. But after the 3 days of this gathering, I don't think they slept. They sat together, working on ways that they could bring peace between their countries. That's what Roots and Shoots can do. And in the world as it is today, it's a very dark world with wars. This is so important. One other thing my mother did for me when I just left school, she let me go to Germany to live with the family there. They wanted someone to help their 3 children speak good English. It wasn't long after the war ended, World War II. During World War II, we hated the Germans. We felt fear when we heard the Germans speaking. And my mother's friend said, how can you let your daughter go off alone into that terrible country? Mom wanted me to understand that German people were not the same as Hitler's Nazi people. In every country, most people want to live peacefully. Most people want to live a life where they feel safe and secure. And now the world is becoming more and more divisive, more and more conflicts around the world. It's not just Ukraine and Gaza and Sudan, which are 3 terrible conflicts, also the Democratic Republic of Congo. But I was looking up the number of conflicts, and there were so many, I couldn't begin to tell you all of them. Why we humans, the most intellectual creatures on the planet, we've lost our intelligence, we're harming each other, we're harming the environment. It's our one home. We must learn to live together in peace, to enjoy the beauty of nature that we are, even as I speak, destroying in so many places. So people say to me, but Jane, how can you still have hope? Hope number 1 is young people. As I go around the world, I find young people so committed, so dedicated, so enthusiastic, so determined to make this world better. You have to have them. The resilience of nature, many examples of places we've destroyed, and yet given time and perhaps some help, nature will return. Fly over the Gombe National Park today, there's no bare hills around it anymore. The forest has come back. And that's repeated around the world in many different countries, including Mexico. And then there's our intellect. I've already said we're the most intellectual creature, but we seem to have lost intelligence. Intelligent creatures don't destroy their only home. And we're just beginning. Science is beginning to come up with technologies like renewable to enable us to live in greater harmony with the natural world. And I think an important point here for any of you who want to go on and be scientists. Yes, the brain is very important. When you meet somebody who thinks unlike you, how do you persuade them that they're wrong, like climate deniers? It's no good arguing with them. They won't listen. You've got to find a way to reach the heart. I do that by telling stories. It's when head and heart work in harmony that we can achieve our greatest human potential. And our potential is huge. And then my last reason for hope is what I call the indomitable human spirit, people who tackle what seems impossible and won't give up and so often succeed. It's so important not to give up. It's so important to have hope. Because without hope, why should we bother? We become apathetic, we do nothing. And if this happens around the world, we're doomed. We have to roll up our sleeves and take action. So the indomitable human spirit is not only people like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King. We all have our heroes in different countries, but also people who have tremendous physical disabilities, and yet they're out there in the world giving example to others. And I carry Mr. H for a reason. He's Mr. H because he was given to me by a man who carried Paul. That was 35 years ago. This guy was 35 years old, and he's been with me in 64 countries. Gary thought he was giving me a stuffed chimpanzee, and I made him all the tail. Gary, chimps don't have tails. He said, never mind, take him with you where you go, and you know how spirits can be. When he went blind at 21 in the US Marines, he decided to become a magician. Everybody said, Gary, how can you be a magician? You're blind. Well, he lays his props on ahead of time. The children don't know he's blind. He does shows for them. And at the end, he'll tell them, I can't see. He says, things may go wrong in your life, you never know. If they do, don't give up. There is always a way forward. He does skydiving, deep sea diving. He taught himself to paint. We have an amazing portrait of Mr. H, whom he's never seen, only felt. And so he's just like one example I can carry around to illustrate the indomitable human spirit. And the last word I'll say to every single one of you, you have that indomitable spirit. We all have. Too many people don't let it out to do good in the world. Please let your indomitable spirit rise out and help to make this a better world. Thank you.